upwards. A hand holds a blue smartphone, which vibrates intensely, indicating an urgent incoming call or notification. John Doe, still bandaged and wearing his cast, sits up in bed, looking utterly startled with his mouth open and eyes wide, reacting to a sudden event. Still injured with a black eye and bandages, John Doe looks intently at a smartphone held by a hand in a light blue sleeve, his expression serious. John Doe, still bearing his black eye and bandages, looks intently forward, his expression serious, as the smartphone remains in view. John, still bandaged, sits up and intently examines his smartphone as it emits a series of beeps. Still recovering, John Doe sits up on the bed, his bandaged face showing as he gently holds his injured wrist, indicating lingering pain. Sweat beads on a hand as another hand firmly grips it, suggesting a moment of intense emotion or support. Still bearing his black eye and facial bandages, John Doe gazes with a serious, contemplative expression, processing recent events. Still bearing his bandages, John Doe looks utterly shocked, staring at the messy dark hair of the student. The man smiles unsettlingly, his eyes obscured, while John Doe reacts with shock and confusion from behind. Moments later, the school building stands under a bright sky as the sound of a bell rings out, marking a transition. John Doe, still sporting a bandage, walks confidently through the school hallway, a slight smirk on his face as other students react to his presence. Serafina and Remy smirk, looking down at Blake, who appears unimpressed. John Doe's face is shown close up, revealing a dark black eye, bandages, and bruises around his mouth, reflecting his recent injuries and serious demeanor. John, still bearing bandages and a bruise, reacts with a flinch as a hand slams forcefully nearby, causing shockwaves. He grabs John Doe's neck, taunting him with a smirk as John looks on, still bearing his injuries. John Doe, still bruised and bandaged, reacts with intense anger, clenching his fist as he processes the news of Serafina's suspension. Serafina's eyes glow green as she smirks, joined by Remy, both looking down at Blake. Remy and Elaine stand in the school hallway, both caught in the powerful shockwave, their expressions obscured by the intense force. John Doe lies still, eyes closed, with bandages still on his face, possibly recovering from his injuries. Serafina looks down with a confident smirk at Remy, whose back is turned. John Doe, still bruised and bandaged, glares with a fierce, determined expression, his eyes narrowed intently after the shockwave. Serafina now wears a strained, worried expression, her eyes still intensely glowing. At that moment, Serafina looks down at John Doe with a distressed expression, hand raised, while John, still bandaged, gazes up at her, looking surprised. John Doe, still bearing bandages, reveals a faint, knowing smirk, a subtle shift in his expression. John forcefully grabs the collar of Cecile, who recoils in distress, sweat dripping from their face. He now looks utterly stunned and distressed, perspiration showing as a hand rests on their shoulder amidst the glowing eyes in the dark. John Doe's eyes glow intensely, a red aura emanating around him, as Cecile and a shocked Remy react to his power. The man's eyes glow with intense power, his face grim and determined as red energy pulses around him. John Doe's bruised face, still bandaged, shows a fierce, determined glare, his eyes narrowed intently. Cecile looks utterly terrified, while Holden snarls menacingly, his eyes glowing with rage. Holden points frantically, surrounded by glowing red eyes, as Remy and other students recoil in terror from John Doe's overwhelming power. He forcefully stomps his foot, sending a shockwave as students press against the wall, reacting to his intimidating display. Cecile looks away with a blush and sweat drop, muttering in frustration amidst John Doe's display of power. John Doe's bruised face and eyes glare intensely as he demands someone stop, a hand visible in the background. Serafina confronts John Doe, gripping his shoulder with an angry glare as John meets her gaze with a determined, bruised expression. Cecile manages a strained, uncomfortable smile, evident by the tension around their eyes. John Doe's amber eye is wide, showing his exhaustion and the bruising around it as a hand gently touches his ear. He pauses in thought. Serafina smiles, leaning on the wall to corner John Doe, whose bandaged face looks away. A student stands nearby, back turned. John Doe, with a bandage on his cheek, watches silently as Elaine and Remy walk away from him down the school hallway. John's bruised face, now bandaged over his eye and cheek, remains still. He appears lost in thought, the silence hanging heavy. With bandages on his cheek and chin, John Doe's eyes narrow fiercely, his bruised face set with intense determination. From behind, Remy looks down a staircase at Serafina, standing by a closed door with a pink suitcase. Remy, with her pink hair in a bun and wearing a business suit, stands at the top of a staircase landing. Serafina offers a subtle, confident smirk, her eyes holding a sharp gaze. The girl maintains an intense gaze, radiating focus in this close-up shot. Serafina, in a business suit, delivers a powerful slap to the face of Serafina. Remy now bears scratches on her cheek, her eyes fixed with a determined gaze. The girl blushes, looking down shyly as Serafina addresses her. Serafina glares, warning her not to become a failure like their sister. At that moment, Serafina is seen in profile, her face bruised and scratched, suggesting a recent struggle. Serafina's determined gaze is unwavering, her cheeks still marked with fresh scratches from the recent struggle she endured. Remy lies on her bed, engrossed in her laptop. The screen illuminates her face and the orange blanket, suggesting a quiet, focused moment in her room. Serafina, with her vibrant purple and yellow, streaked hair, looks forward with a determined, serious expression as a sound interrupts the moment. Moments later, Serafina holds her phone, a subtle smile on her face as a notification arrives. John Doe crouches, holding a blue object to his forehead, his face obscured by shadow. Sweat drips from his arm, indicating exhaustion or distress. John holds a phone to his ear, his amber eyes showing a serious, contemplative expression as he listens intently. John holds a blue phone to his ear, his amber eyes wide with a surprised or nervous expression, reacting to what he hears. John Doe, seen from behind, holds a blue phone to his ear, his messy black hair visible as he engages in a conversation. Serafina holds the phone to her ear, a slight smile playing on her lips as she continues her conversation. John Doe smiles subtly, a small sweat drop appearing on his cheek as he continues his phone conversation, his amber eyes looking thoughtful. John reacts with a frustrated facepalm, his eyes closed in exasperation as he sits at his desk, surrounded by papers and a laptop. John Doe looks away slightly, a small sweat drop on his cheek, as he quietly says thanks, his amber eyes showing a hint of discomfort. Serafina lies on her stomach, looking intently at a laptop. She expresses that something is. John Doe looks forward with a slight, knowing smirk as he's asked about how home is. Serafina looks intently at her laptop, her hand gently touching her cheek as she ponders the situation. John Doe looks flustered, a pencil in his hand, as he struggles to respond, insisting he's trying. John Doe glances to the side, his amber eyes narrowed and a sweat drop on his cheek, showing clear irritation. Serafina, still lying on her stomach, intently watches her laptop screen, considering the comment about playing as a cartoon hand clicks a wooden frame, illustrating a plan to protect the smiling chick, like creatures from airborne attacks. A cartoon game unfolds as explosions erupt over structures housing cute yellow chicks, while pink pig characters fall from the sky. John Doe looks confused and slightly annoyed, holding a pencil as he processes the game's complicated rules and how to advance to the next level. Serafina smiles softly, resting her hand on her cheek, a musical note floating nearby. She appears content, still engaged with her screen. John Doe's face is shadowed, with an angry mark on his cheek and frustrated lines in the background, showing his intense displeasure. Serafina suggests they start building houses with glass, her expression thoughtful as she strategizes for the game. John Doe throws his arm out in frustration, his face contorted in anger as he rails against the game's mechanics on his laptop. Serafina calmly states her position, telling him to simply deal with it. Regarding the game, her expression firm. John Doe's frustration mounts, his eyes wide and brow furrowed in disbelief as he reacts to the game's latest twist. John walks through the school hallway, holding a blue device, seemingly lost in thought as other students pass by the lockers. He looks away, a band aid on his cheek, as he holds his phone with a slightly pensive or annoyed expression. John Doe suddenly grabs Arlo by his shoulder, stopping him forcefully in the hallway. Arlo watches with a stern, intense expression as he faces someone close by. Moments later, Arlo shoves John Doe, who still has a band aid on his cheek and holds his device, sternly telling him to watch where he walks. A close-up reveals Arlo's intense eye as he seems to be observing something intently. John Doe looks startled, mouth slightly agape, as Blake walks past him in the school hallway, his back turned. At that moment, Arlo's blue eye is narrowed, looking sharply to the side, with a spiky effect above his head indicating a sudden, intense reaction or realization. John Doe stares at his laptop screen, his face contorted in an expression of intense frustration and anger, perspiration showing on his temple. John Doe is violently thrown backward, his body contorting from a powerful impact. He closes his eyes in pain as debris explodes around him. John's face contorts in agony, blood trickling from his mouth and chin after the brutal impact. His wide eyes reflect intense pain and shock. Remy glares with glowing eyes, appearing annoyed, as a male student next to her activates his glowing eyes sternly. John Doe coughs violently, blood trickling from his mouth and nose, his face contorted in pain and exhaustion after the powerful impact. A student with spiky purple hair and Cecile stand over a dejected John Doe, who sits on the floor. The student is done here. John's amber eye glares intensely, a sweat drop on his brow. Scratches and a hint of blood mark his cheek, showing the toll of the recent impact. John appears heavily bandaged across his chest and arm, with a small bandage on his face, as someone remarks on his severe injuries. John glares with a stern expression, a bandage on his lip and scratches on his face, as he insists he didn't start anything. An injured John Doe, with bandages and scratches on his face, speaks to an unseen person, explaining he was attacked without provocation. John Doe's amber eye is wide and intense, his expression resolute as he speaks, seemingly unafraid to challenge. John, still bandaged, sits with his shirt partially unbuttoned, holding his arm while facing the person with dark blue hair. Still sporting a lip bandage and facial scratches, John Doe's eyes narrow, showing a determined or annoyed expression with perspiration on his brow. John Doe, still bearing bandages on his lip and arm and scratches on his face, is seen with his white shirt unbuttoned, revealing an undershirt. John's eyes narrow with an intense glare, perspiration showing on his cheek, reflecting his continued stress. John holds his phone, its screen completely shattered with cracks radiating from a central impact point, a clear sign of recent damage. A character in a white lab coat sits at a desk, talking on the phone while simultaneously writing notes. John continues their phone call, a subtle, confident smirk playing on their lips. His tense hand slams down forcefully on a device with multiple pads, expressing his intense frustration. John Doe stands, head bowed, his hand resting on his side as visible bruises and bandages highlight his continued injuries and discomfort. The phone lies utterly demolished on the ground, its screen completely shattered and the device bent, reflecting the intense destruction. John Doe's amber eye narrows with an intense, focused gaze. John Doe's eyes glow red with a smirk, as Serafina's eyes burn with a focused, intense gaze. John grits his teeth, his eyes squinted in intense pain or frustration, the bandage still visible on his injured face. John turns, his face still bearing scratches and a chin bandage, with his unbuttoned shirt revealing more bandages on his chest. A hand forcefully grips a piece of white fabric, the sudden movement emphasized by speed lines, reflecting an intense emotional state. Still injured, John Doe stands with visible scratches and a bandage as the student places a hand on his shoulder, questioning where he's going. John Doe shoves the boy away, who recoils in surprise as John, still injured, demands he let go. His amber eye narrows with furious intensity, his bruised face contorted in anger as he clenches his jaw, his hand touching his neck. John Doe's eyes narrow with fierce determination, his face still marked by scratches and a small bandage on his lip. John looks away, his injured face flushed and a bandage on his lip, as the boy watches him. John's amber eye glows with fierce intensity, his expression serious as faint red particles still surround him, implying a warning about his vulnerable state. The boy stands silently, his expression unreadable, while John Doe looks away in the foreground, red still glowing around them. John's mouth is tightly drawn, showing his continued struggle as Blake reacts with visible red marks near his neck. John's amber eye remains narrowed with intense resolve, his cheek still marked by scratches, as he warns he will only cause more trouble. John, still appearing small, angrily tells the boy to sit down as he stands dejectedly by the hospital bed, surrounded by faint red glows. John's eyes narrow with fierce resolve, his face still bearing scratches and a bandaged lip amidst the faint red glows. His amber eye glows with fierce intensity, his blue hair visible, as red specks continue to float around him. John Doe's eyes remain narrowed with fierce intensity, his cheeks still bearing scratches, as faint red specks drift nearby. John's face remains marked by a small bandage on his chin, his expression still reflecting the strain of the confrontation. John bumps into the student, who reacts with a visibly angry expression, red marks flaring above his head. John is now resting in the hospital bed, lying on his side with his hand gently placed near his head, appearing deeply asleep after the intense confrontation. The boy with dark blue hair, still in his white lab coat, looks away with a somber, weary expression. John Doe's amber eye is narrowed with intense frustration, a bead of sweat on his cheek, as he appears to question someone. John, bearing fresh scratches and a chin bandage, intently studies the stack of papers in his hands, his eyes reflecting a serious, focused expression. John, still bearing bandages, is violently shoved by an unseen assailant, sending papers flying as he winces in pain. Papers lie scattered across the tiled floor around the person's feet, suggesting a sudden disruption in the tense atmosphere. John Doe kneels on the school hallway floor, carefully picking up scattered papers. A bandage is visible on his cheek, hinting at a recent injury. John Doe's intense glare continues, his eyes narrowed, with visible scratches and a small bandage on his face. Blake and Remy walk through the school hallway, passing two other students, one of whom gestures animatedly while looking back at them. John Doe kneels, flustered, hastily gathering scattered papers while Remy observes him from the foreground. Remy looks ahead seriously, her eyes narrowed, as Blake stands partially visible behind her. Blake turns his head away, annoyed, as Remy's hair sweeps past him. John Doe looks down, his face still bearing visible scratches and a bandage, his messy black hair falling forward. Remy bends down, her hand reaching for a piece of paper, as another's hand also moves to collect another sheet from the floor. John Doe's eyes narrow, intensely strained, with sweat on his forehead amidst his visible scratches and bandage. John's eyes are wide and intense, with sweat and tension lines on his face. Cecile looks down with a slight, unsettling smile, her eyes obscured by shadow. John Doe's amber eye widens further in intense shock, his brow furrowed and sweat still visible on his scratched face. Remy and John Doe quickly kneel to gather the scattered papers as Blake stands nearby, observing the scene. Without warning, Remy's eyes widen, strained and focused, with sweat on her face as she reacts to the unfolding events. John Doe clenches his teeth, his face grimacing with effort, his eyes narrowed as he grips his shirt tightly. The visible scratches and bandage remain. John's eyes glare intensely, his brow furrowed, with sweat and scratches still on his determined face. Remy stands with a downcast expression, her pink hair falling over her face as she gently holds her wrist. An exclamation mark suggests surprise from someone nearby. A beat later, Remy's eyes narrow, seriously and determinedly, her brow furrowed as she intently watches the situation unfold. John Doe looks to the side, grimacing, his eyes narrowed, still bearing the scratches and bandage on his face, with another student partially visible beside him. His hand glows intensely, emitting red energy beams and forming a small red orb, fueled by his fierce effort. John Doe's eyes are wide and intensely focused, sweat on his forehead, his expression still showing clear determination and effort. As Remy kneels, powerful red energy beams violently erupt from her body, while John Doe remains crouched, focused on the scattered papers. John Doe hunches over, his arms covering his head, bracing against a bright, sharp energy impact striking him. John's fierce glare remains, his eyes narrowed, his scratches and bandage visible. Behind him, a framed picture on the wall shatters from an impact. The student takes a deliberate step forward, his dark shoes planted on the light blue floor, continuing to advance. John Doe kneels, looking up with a blush as Blake stands over him, holding crumpled papers, his own face obscured by a red glow. Blake glares intensely, his eyes narrowed, as he demands a reason not to fight, conveying clear anger and frustration. John Doe's eyes are wide, showing a mix of strain and concern, with sweat and fresh scratches on his cheek. Blake's hair frames his intensely focused face, his eyes glowing with fierce determination as he grits his teeth. John Doe's angry hand firmly grips his sleeve, while another hand grabs his arm, caught in a surge of red energy. Remy gently tugs on Blake's arm, her expression unseen as she quietly urges him to let it go. Blake looks on with a stern, annoyed expression, his eyes glowing with intensity. John Doe sits with a band-aid on his cheek, looking downcast, as another student stomps past, angrily crumpling a paper. John Doe, visibly worn out, sighs in weary relief, a bandage on his cheek hinting at the struggle he just endured. In the bustling hallway, John Doe kneels, quietly picking up papers scattered on the floor, while Blake walks away in the background. John Doe kneels in the hallway, quietly picking up scattered papers while other students walk past, seemingly ignoring him. John kneels, head bowed in apparent resignation, as he gathers the scattered papers from the floor, surrounded by unseen figures. John looks down, his face obscured by shadow, showing fresh scratches and a bandage on his cheek as he remains silently pensive. John's face reveals faint scratch marks on his cheek and a small bandage on his lip, reflecting his recent struggles. As John Doe remains on the floor, other students walk past in the hallway, their faces obscured, with a girl smiling subtly nearby. She looks intently, a subtle emotion playing on. John Doe looks forward with a stern, determined expression, internally musing that it's unlike him to stay upset about something for so long. Serafina looks forward with a calm, slightly questioning expression, her purple and green hair framing her face as dialogue appears. John Doe now offers a subtle, almost gentle smile, his eyes reflecting a shift in his mood. John watches Serafina on his laptop, declaring his intent to see how far he can push things, while Serafina appears on screen with her distinctive purple and. Serafina smiles gently, a faint blush on her cheeks, her long purple hair with green streaks framing her face. John Doe looks at his laptop with a confused expression, wondering aloud what's so funny. She smirks confidently, her purple hair with green streaks framing her face as she speaks about a hopeless attitude. John Doe then offers a subtle, knowing smile, a faint blush visible on his cheeks as he looks away. An exterior shot shows a modern house with its distinctive large windows and balconies. Serafina, wearing a blazer and green jewelry, maintains a stern expression as she is greeted. Ventus expresses surprise as Cecile returns unexpectedly, asking about Serafina's behavior. Remy lies in bed, her pink hair visible, illuminated by her laptop screen as she focuses intently. Remy, still engrossed in her laptop, sits on a couch with her long pink hair falling over her face, illuminated by the screen. The student's laptop displays a top 10 fashion trends video, but it's stuck buffering, much to their likely frustration. The girl looks unimpressed as a door opens, revealing her bored expression. Remy looks wide-eyed and flustered, a sweat drop indicating her surprise as a shock effect emanates above them. A beat later, Remy, still looking surprised, greets Cecile, asking if she's returned. The girl demands Serafina's phone, clearly unhappy with her hair extensions and gesturing for it. Remy looks sternly ahead, a slight sweat drop indicating her continued flustered state as she listens to the ongoing conversation. Serafina shows a slight frown and a sweat drop, maintaining a look of mild discomfort or surprise. She now looks sternly, asserting that Layla did nothing wrong. Serafina glares sharply, her brow furrowed in a focused or angry expression. Her hand, adorned with green nail polish, opens to receive the phone being passed to her. The girl looks on with a tense, focused expression, a small sweat drop indicating her unease. John Doe has bandages on his cheek and arm as he holds his jacket, standing by a white door. John, in a chibi style, contentedly clicks his mouse while using his laptop, a bandage still visible on his cheek and arm as he waits. John Doe, still bandaged, sits at his laptop, looking utterly frustrated as he covers his face, feeling like he's finally stuck. John presses his hand to his head, his eyes reflecting deep worry as he processes the strange situation with Serafina's missed calls. The school building stands under a bright blue sky with fluffy clouds, signaling a shift in location from John Doe's troubled thoughts. His feet pound the ground, kicking up water as he dashes forward, clearly in a hurry. John Doe walks through the school hallway, holding a lunch tray, while the boy sneaks up behind him, looking mischievous. Arlo smirks confidently, his eyes glowing with power. He unleashes a charged, red punch, seemingly ready to dominate in battle. John Doe's amber eye gleams with intense focus, his brow furrowed as he continues to process the situation. Suddenly, Arlo lunges forward, delivering a powerful punch with a glowing red fist directly to John Doe's face, catching him off guard. Arlo collapses to the ground, clutching his bleeding face. Blood drips from his nose as he reacts in shock, with the boy standing over him. After the intense fight, a hand gently reaches down to pick up a bright red apple from the tiled floor. Arlo clutches his bleeding nose, tears welling in his glowing eyes, showing visible pain and anger. Holden stands in the background. John Doe glares, his eyes narrowed, angered by the recent attack as he declares he's not in the mood for any more trouble. Arlo sits on the floor, clutching his bleeding nose and looking dazed, while John Doe watches him with an unreadable, calm expression. Meanwhile, a student walks up a flight of stairs, while a tuft of hair is visible in the foreground, near the floor. John Doe stands holding a food tray with an apple and juice as a door slides open beside him, revealing a student's neutral expression. John's eyes narrow slightly, a subtle, knowing expression on his face as he looks forward. At that moment, Arlo looks intently to the side, his eyes narrowed, framed by a chain, link fence against the bright blue sky. Meili watches with a stern, serious expression, her eyes narrowed and brows furrowed. Then, Arlo looks intently forward, his eyes gleaming with determination as he stands before the chain, link fence. A beat later, Arlo looks up through a chain link fence, observing the school building and students from a unique perspective. John Doe, with glowing red eyes, grabs Ventus by the collar, pushing him against the wall as Ventus looks distressed. Two female students converse in a school hallway. One student, with long hair, listens as the other, with shorter hair, gestures while speaking. John Doe looks on with a surprised expression, his mouth slightly agape. The student stands with a neutral expression, holding a tray of food as he appears to enter or exit a room. Arlo stands with his hands in his pockets, gazing out through the chain link fence, deep in thought as John Doe stands nearby. Moments later, Arlo looks on with a sharp, stern expression, his blue eyes focused while standing by the fence. John Doe, carrying a tray of food, questions Arlo on the rooftop, asking what he's doing up there. Arlo looks intently to the side, his blue eyes narrowed with a stern expression as he reacts to something off panel. John Doe stares intensely, his amber eyes narrowed, as he processes the situation and the implications of what is being said. John looks directly forward, his eyes serious and resolute as he processes the situation. A beat later, Arlo looks intently to the side, his eyes narrowed and a stern expression, continuing his thoughtful demeanor. The student, with a serious expression, holds his lunch tray while telling Arlo off panel. His foot subtly shifts on the tiled floor, suggesting a slight movement or change in his posture as he continues to react. John Doe approaches Arlo, who stands by the chain link fence while Arlo looks away, seemingly lost in thought. John sits dejectedly on the ground, holding his lunch tray, as Arlo stands over him, silently observing the situation. Arlo's blue eye narrows with a sharp, intense gaze, his expression serious as he speaks from behind the chain link fence. John Doe holds a burger to his mouth, his eyes narrowed and focused as he prepares to take a bite. Arlo stands with his arms crossed, his eyes narrowed and a stern expression, clearly displeased by the situation. Moments later, Arlo's eyes narrow with a stern, questioning gaze as he looks to the side, still positioned by the chain link fence. Arlo's eyes narrow with an intense, stern gaze, his expression unyielding as he pointedly questions him. Without warning, Arlo's lips curl into a subtle, almost imperceptible smirk, hinting at his thoughts as he stands by the chain link fence. As John Doe takes a bite of his burger, Arlo stands over him with crossed arms and a confident smirk, stating he could crush him instantly. John Doe pauses, his eyes narrowed with a wary expression as he listens to the other student. Arlo smirks, arms crossed, looking down at John Doe, whose face is partially obscured as he speaks from below him.